Does every dad do this? The young girl asks, sobbing, as she enters a police station. What they found silenced everyone. Tell us where you're watching from in the comment section below. Before we get started with this story, savor the narrative. At the little police station in Millbrook, Georgia, it was meant to be another typical Tuesday morning. The front door exploded with such force that everyone in the station looked up as Officer Michael Rodriguez finished his coffee. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, staggered through the door. Her tiny hands gripped her stomach as though she were trying to hold something inside, and she was dressed in a worn blue frock that had seen better days. Tears were streaming down her face, and she was breathing in sharp, frantic breaths. There was silence throughout the station. Rachel Martinez, a young officer who'd been filing at her desk, got up right away. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the child's face. This was not the wail of a toy gone missing or a scraped knee. There was much more to this. Officer Michael knelt to the small girl's eye level and said, "Hey there, sweetheart," with gentleness. Throughout his 15 years on the force, he had soothed innumerable people with his warm, gentle voice. With wide, terrified eyes, the young girl scanned the station while wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "What's your name?" she asked. She appeared to be gaining strength for a significant endeavor. She muttered, "Sophie," so softly that Michael had to bend over to hear her. Rachel murmured, "That's a beautiful name, Sophie," as she approached the infant cautiously so as not to frighten him. Sophie's bottom lip quivered as she glanced between the two officers and asked, "Can you tell us what's wrong? You seem very upset." She parted her lips as though to speak, then shut them again. After what seemed like a lifetime, she finally posed a question that would make all the difference. Is this what all fathers do? No one understood how to bear the weight of the words that hung in the air. A glance between Rachel and Officer Michael said it all. They had heard several calls for assistance during their years of duty. However, these 5 straightforward words made them shiver for some reason. Rachel sat down on a neighboring chair to avoid being too tall for the terrified toddler and asked softly, "What do you mean, honey?" With new tears streaming down her cheeks, Sophie simply shook her head when asked, "Can you tell us what your dad does?" She gazed at the door as though she thought someone would suddenly come looking for her. "I just wanted to know," she said in a low voice. The station sergeant, an elderly guy named Bill who had witnessed everything in his 30 years of duty, took up the phone gently and said, "Because if every dad does it, then maybe I should just get used to it." He suspected that they would all be dealing with this matter for a very long time. Officer Michael gave Sophie the option to accept or reject his hand as he slowly extended it palm up. "You're safe here, Sophie. We're going to work this out together, and nobody is going to harm you." Sophie gazed at his extended hand for a considerable amount of time. Then she put her little hand in his, with a bravery that seemed much too great for someone so small. None of them realized, however, that this was only the start of a tale that would reveal mysteries, push the boundaries of the system, and eventually demonstrate that sometimes the most significant messages are spoken by the smallest voices. Sophie sat down in the tiny waiting room of the station, still holding Officer Michael's hand, and gazed up at her with eyes too sorrowful for a child. She questioned, "Are you going to make me go back home?" Sophie was still holding a tissue that Sergeant Bill had tenderly handed her as Officer Rachel took her seat across from her. As if terrified of what she may see outside, the young girl's eyes kept darting toward the window. "Sophie," murmured Rachel quietly, "if we discussed anything else first, would it help? For example, how did you arrive here today?" Slowly nodding, Sophie seemed relieved to discuss a topic that felt more secure. She whispered, "I walked. It was really time-consuming." "Sweetheart, where did you walk from?" Officer Michael pulled up a chair to join them and asked, "My home, on Maple Street by the large oak tree. It was the most beautiful tree in Georgia, according to Mama." The mention of her mother brought a faint smile to Sophie's face for the first time since she had arrived. Rachel's heart constricted. "Where is your mama now, honey?" used to ask, and the little smile vanished right away. 3 years ago, she entered heaven. It was at that point that everything changed. Rachel and Officer Michael exchanged another deep glance. For a little girl, especially one who was just 8 years old. 3 years without her mother was a long period. Rachel gently questioned. Now, can you tell us about before your mama went to heaven? What was it like then? Sophie's entire face brightened, and she briefly had the appearance of any other contented youngster. Oh, it was amazing. Every Sunday morning, Mama would prepare pancakes, and we would gather on the lawn for tea parties. She showed me how to cultivate flowers and braid my hair, along with Daddy. Then, too, Daddy was different. How is it different? Michael asked thoughtfully. Sophie's face became contemplative, as though she was recalling something from a very long time ago. When he got home from work, he would pick me up and spin me around. He would assist me with my studies and read me stories before bed. I even learned how to ride my bike from him. She hesitated, the tissue in her palms being twisted by her little fingers. However, Daddy said that things had to alter when Mama left. He claimed that I was growing too old for bedtime stories and hugs. According to him, those things weaken and spoil kids. A shiver went down Rachel's back. She had experienced foster care as a child, so she was well aware of what it was like to be told that you weren't worthy of love. Sophie, she said cautiously, when was the last time you were hugged by your father? Sophie pondered for a while, her youthful forehead wrinkled in focus. It was at Mama's funeral, I believe. However, he went on to say that we needed to be stronger today. He emphasized that I needed to mature quickly, and that sobbing and embracing were just for infants. With the exception of the gentle hum of the air conditioner, the room became quiet. Sergeant Bill had even stopped typing at his desk, where he was feigning to work. Michael questioned, "What about your friends at school?" Sophie sadly shook her head when asked, "Do you get to play with them?" "Daddy says I can't go to other kids' houses because I might upset their families or pick up bad behaviors, and I can't have friends around since our house isn't for playing." "Bad habits?" Trying to maintain a steady tone, Rachel asked, as in anticipating, as though this made perfect sense to her. Sophie stated matter-of-factly, "You get disappointed when real life happens when you expect hugs and kind words," explains Daddy. "Therefore, it's best to have no expectations." Officer Michael needed to inhale deeply. During his years of employment, he had never heard a child discuss something that should have been as simple as breathing with such resignation. "Softly, Sophie," he said. Sophie's eyes widened and she nodded enthusiastically as she said, "At your friends' houses, when you see their parents, do they hug their children?" "Yes, and they say I love you and good job and sweet dreams." At first, I thought they might be being gracious since I was here, but then I gave it some thought. Rachel leaned forward a little as she drifted off. "Sweetheart, what did you wonder?" Sophie's eyes, which were far too confused for someone so young, gazed up at both officers. I ponder whether my father simply did different things because he loves me differently, or if he simply forgot how to do those things after Mama left. There was no mistaking the anguish in her voice. This young child was searching desperately for any explanation as to why her environment had become so chilly and desolate. Sophie went on, "That's why I came here," her voice growing softer. She glanced up at them with a forlorn longing in her eyes. "I wanted to ask someone who would know the truth, because if every daddy does what my daddy does, then I should stop wishing for things to be different," she said. "If they don't, then maybe something is wrong, and maybe someone can help fix it." Officer Rachel looked at Sophie's hopeful face and felt her heart breaking. How do you tell an 8-year-old that what she's experiencing isn't normal without shattering the last bit of trust she has in the world? "Sophie," Rachel said carefully, "before we answer your question, I need to ask you something important. When you walked here today, does your daddy know where you are?" Sophie's face immediately palled, and she shook her head quickly. "No, he thinks I'm at school, but I couldn't concentrate on my lessons today. Mrs. Peterson, my teacher, kept asking if I was okay, and I almost told her about my question, but then I got scared." "Scared of what, sweetheart?" Officer Michael asked gently. Sophie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Daddy says I'm not supposed to talk to people about our family. He says what happens in our house is private, and if I tell people our business, they might get the wrong idea and try to interfere." The officers exchanged another look. This was exactly the kind of isolation they'd been trained to recognize. But coming from an 8-year-old's innocent perspective made it even more heartbreaking. Interfere with what? Rachel asked softly. Sophie fidgeted with her dress and looked down at her shoes. With his way of raising me. He says every parent has their own way, and his way is making me strong and independent. He says other parents are too soft, and that's why their children grow up weak. Just then, the phone on Sergeant Bill's desk rang loudly, making everyone jump. Sophie immediately tensed up, her eyes darting toward the door. It's okay, honey. Michael reassured her quickly. That's just our regular phone. Nobody knows you're here, Sophie said, getting to her feet with a voice full of panic. I should return to school, she said. Daddy will be very upset at me if he finds out that I left. He always claims that since I failed as his daughter, disappointment is greater than rage. Rachel's training began to take effect. She was aware that they might not see Sophie again if she went today. Hold on, Sophie. What if we informed your school that you were safe over the phone? Would that be beneficial? Sophie paused but did not return to her seat. That's something you can do. We can, of course, Officer Michael responded. We work with schools all the time. In fact, why don't we call Mrs. Peterson right now? I bet she's been worried about you. For the first time since arriving, Sophie looked genuinely surprised. She would be worried about me. The innocent question hit both officers like a punch to the gut. This little girl was so starved for care that the idea of someone worrying about her was completely foreign. Oh, sweetie, Rachel said, fighting back tears. Of course she would. Teachers genuinely care about their pupils. A youngster becomes anxious and ill when they are unhappy or absent. Sophie took a seat again slowly as she processed this knowledge. Really, even if I'm the only child, Michael stated forcefully, especially if the child is you. You seem like such a unique young girl, Sophie. Many individuals probably care more about you than you think. Sophie appeared perplexed by this idea. But according to Daddy, having too much concern for other people only leads to disappointment. Rachel inhaled deeply as he said, It's better to not expect people to care, because then you won't be hurt when they don't. This was becoming an increasingly challenging topic. However, she was aware that caution was necessary. Sophie may be thrown back into a scenario that was obviously damaging her emotional health with only one incorrect phrase. Her words were gentle. Sophie, she said, different families have different rules. That's true. But some rules aren't very good for children. Can you tell us what other rules your daddy has? Sophie started to count on her fingers, as though she were reciting a list she clearly knew. Asking for what I want would be greedy, so I can't do that. When I'm depressed, I can't cry since it would be overly dramatic. I can't chat to my neighbors because it annoys them. Since our house isn't for games and enjoyment, I can't bring friends here. After a moment, she added softly, Furthermore, I can't say I love you or I want hugs, since those things should only be expressed when they're truly, truly meant. Additionally, they lose their uniqueness if you utter them too often. There was utter silence in the room. The police station's typical noises also appear to have ceased. Officer Michael carefully cleared his throat. How recently have you been told you are loved, Sophie? Sophie's little forehead furrowed in concentration as she pondered for a long time. Just before she entered heaven, I believe it was Mama. I was seated next to her bed when she murmured it in my ear. She had the saddest expression as she gazed up at them. 3 years have passed since then. Those are still really wonderful words, aren't they? As I've been hoarding them for a long time. Both cops understood at that point that they were facing more than a case of emotional maltreatment. They were staring at a young child who had been indoctrinated to believe that human connection, love, and emotion were unworthy luxury. The worst aspect was that Sophie continued to accept her father's method as the usual. She continued to attempt to persuade herself that perhaps this was the way fathers love their daughters. However, time was running short. Sophie would have to return to school soon, and then she would have to return home. Unless they were able to assist her, this courageous little girl would vanish back into a society that rationed affection and viewed childhood as a weakness that needed to be conquered. The station door opened again just as Officer Michael was ready to answer Sophie's sorrowful inquiry about preserving those priceless words. I love you. Sarah Williams, a social worker with more than 15 years of experience with the police department. was the one this time. Children were instantly calmed by Sarah's sweet demeanor and kind eyes beneath wire-rimmed glasses. However, she seems abnormally worried today. Without initially noticing Sophie, Sarah remarked softly to Sergeant Bill, "I got a call from Millbrook Elementary. The teacher is really concerned when one of their students vanished at lunch. Sophie Chun is a young child." Sarah's eyes widened at seeing the youngster seated in the station, and Sophie's head sprang up at the sound of her name. Sarah said, "Oh my goodness, Sophie, there you are," and hurried to meet you. Sophie looked shocked as she replied, "Mrs. Peterson has been very concerned about you. You seemed upset all morning, and then just vanished." Peterson was concerned, very concerned. She phoned the principal. "Honey, we got a call from the principal, and I dropped everything to come help look for you," Sarah said, kneeling down beside Sophie's chair. That's what people do when they care about someone. For the first time since arriving at the station, Sophie's eyes filled with a different kind of tears. Not tears of fear or sadness, but tears of amazement. "I didn't know," Sophie whispered. "I didn't know anyone would notice if I was gone." Sarah's professional composure nearly cracked, but she maintained her gentle smile. "Oh, sweetheart, of course people notice. Mrs. Peterson told me. You're one of her brightest students, and she looks forward to seeing your smile every morning." Sophie touched her own face as if surprised to learn she had a smile that people looked forward to seeing. Officer Rachel cleared her throat gently. Sarah Sophie came here with a very important question. She wanted to know if all fathers treat their children the same way hers does. Sarah's expression immediately became more serious. As an experienced social worker, she recognized the significance of that question. "I see. Sophie, would it be okay if I joined this conversation?" Sophie nodded, though she still looked nervous. "Are you going to tell my daddy I came here?" "That depends," Sarah said. "Honestly, my job is to make sure children are safe and happy. Sometimes that means having difficult conversations with parents, but right now I just want to hear what you have to say." Sophie looked around at the three adults surrounding her. Officer Michael, Officer Rachel, and now Sarah. For a little girl who had been taught that talking to people was bothering them, this felt overwhelming. "I don't know if I should," Sophie said quietly. "Daddy says our family business is private." Sarah nodded understandingly. "You know what, Sophie? You're absolutely right that families deserve privacy. But sometimes when a child is feeling confused or sad about something important, it helps to talk to adults whose job it is to help children." "Like who?" Sophie asked. "Like teachers, like police officers, and like me," Sarah explained. "We're all here because we care about making sure kids are okay. It's not gossiping or sharing secrets. It's asking for help when you need it." Sophie considered this for a moment. "So, asking my question, that's asking for help." "That's exactly what it is," Officer Michael said warmly. "And asking for help when you need it is one of the bravest things a person can do." Sophie straightened up a little, as if the idea of being brave appealed to her. "Okay, but what if my question has a scary answer?" Sarah reached out and gently touched Sophie's hand. "Then we'll figure out what to do about it together. You don't have to face scary things alone, Sophie. That's what adults are for." The simplicity and kindness of that statement seemed to unlock something in Sophie. For the first time, she looked like she might actually believe that help was possible. "Okay," Sophie said, taking a deep breath. "I want to tell you about the rules at my house, but not because I want to get Daddy in trouble." Sarah said softly, "We're listening, Sophie. I just want to know if they're normal rules, or maybe something got mixed up after Mama went to heaven." The three adults looked at each other, each realizing that they were going to hear something that would forever alter this little girl's life. Sophie took a trembling breath and glanced at the three considered adults around her. "Take your time." She felt comfortable telling the truth for the first time in years. "Okay," she muttered. She started counting on her little fingers and reciting each rule as though it were a lesson she had learned by heart. "These are the rules at my house since Mama went to heaven. First rule, every day after school, I have to spend an hour standing motionless in a corner. In order for me to consider all the ways I could be a better daughter, Daddy calls it reflection time." Despite feeling sick to her stomach, Officer Rachel maintained a composed and supportive demeanor. The second rule is that I can't be demanding by asking for food when I'm hungry. Even if my stomach aches, I have to wait till Daddy recalls it's time to eat. Every word was recorded as Sarah's pen slid over her notebook. The third rule, I have to retire to my room if I start crying even a little until I can manage my emotions like a grown-up. Occasionally, that lasts the entire night. Sophie hesitated, her expression concerned. Do you mind if I tell you this? I don't want to cause issues for my father. Perhaps these rules make sense, but I'm still too young to really comprehend them. These are crucial things for us to know, stated Officer Michael softly, adding, You're doing wonderful, Sophie. Are there any more rules? Sophie continued, her voice getting smaller with each rule. Rule number 4, I can't talk to anyone at school about home, and I can't talk to neighbors because family matters are private and people might misunderstand. Rule number 5, I have to ask permission before speaking, even if I have a question about my homework or if I'm hurt. Sarah looked up from her notes. Sophie, what happens if you accidentally break one of these rules? Sophie's eyes filled with sadness. Then Daddy gets really disappointed in me. He doesn't yell or anything like that. He just stops talking to me for days. He calls it thinking time so I can figure out how to be better. The room fell silent except for the soft scratching of Sarah's pen. And the worst part, Sophie whispered, is that during thinking time, I'm not allowed to say goodnight or good morning. I have to pretend I'm invisible until I've learned my lesson. Officer Rachel had to turn away for a moment, recalling her own foster care childhood, where affection was used as a reward that could be taken away. But I don't understand that rule because I'm only 8, Sophie said gingerly. How long do these thinking times usually last? Sometimes 3 days, sometimes a whole week. The longest was 2 weeks when I accidentally called him Daddy instead of Father. He said I was too old for baby words. 8-year-olds can still say Daddy, right? Here's what I don't understand, Sophie added, her voice full of sincere perplexity. I see other kids at school get hugs when they're sad, and their parents pick them up when they fall down. The innocent inquiry hung in the air like a weight that no one knew how to carry. She gazed straight at Sarah with eyes full of frantic hope, as her parents say, I love you and I'm proud of you all the time. I would like to know if those parents are making a mistake by being overly gentle, or is my dad approaching it incorrectly by being overly strict? Because I really need to know which method is correct, but I can't figure out. There was no mistaking the anguish in her voice. This child wasn't whining about their parents' strictness. This young child had been routinely denied love and affection, and she continued to think that she might be to blame. And occasionally, Sophie whispered, sometimes I dream about Mama. In my dreams, she embraces me and assures me that I'm a nice girl. However, I feel bad when I wake up because I might not be thankful for my father's efforts to strengthen me because of those dreams. Putting down her pen, Sarah met Sophie's eyes directly. Can I tell you something really vital, Sophie? Sophie gave a hopeful nod. Every child has a right to experience daily feelings of love, safety, and desire. That isn't being gentle. That isn't a sign of weakness. That's simply human nature. Sophie heard an adult tell her that her innermost wants weren't weaknesses to conquer for the first time in 3 years. With wide eyes, Sophie gazed at Sarah as though she had just been told the most incredible and scary news of her life. Every child has a right to experience love every day. Slowly repeating the phrases, Sophie seemed to be examining their plausibility. Officer Rachel stated, even if they're not perfect, especially if they're not perfect in an emotionally charged tone. Sophie, love isn't something you have to earn by following rules perfectly. Love is something that should just be there like sunshine. Sophie's lips started shaking. However, Father claims that love must be earned in order to prevent children from becoming pampered and expecting unworthy things. Sarah softly leaned forward. I have a question for you, Sophie. Do you recall needing to win your mother's affection when you think about her? Sophie's face lit up instantly. She appeared to be just another contented 8-year-old for a little period. Oh no, even when I failed to put my toys or spilled juice on her favorite outfit, Mama still loved me. She used to declare that no matter what, I was her sunlight. Did you get spoiled as a result? Officer Michael asked quietly. Sophie gave a firm shake of her head. No, I felt so content and secure that it inspired me to be good. Not because I was attempting to win her affection, but because she already loved me. I wanted to make her proud. The adults looked at each other intently. Sophie had just, in her naive knowledge, done a better job than any textbook at explaining the distinction between healthy and harmful family dynamics. "Sophie," Sarah said cautiously, "families are meant to function, as you just explained with your mother." Tears clouded Sophie's eyes. They weren't sad tears, though, this time. They were the tears of a far more intricate thing. She was both relieved and saddened by all the love she had lost. "Therefore, I wasn't dreaming," she muttered. "When Mama loved me unconditionally, that was true love." After a long period of silence during which Sophie processed this devastating realization, Rachel said, "That was the most real love in the world," holding back her own tears. Then she asked a question that broke everyone's heart. "So, why did Daddy alter the guidelines? Did he lose the ability to love me the way his mother did?" When people are very sad and scared, they forget how to show love in healthy ways, Sarah remarked gently. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes adults' own pain and fear can make them hurt the people they're supposed to protect?" The room fell silent. It doesn't mean they don't care, but it does mean they need help remembering how to be loving parents. Sophie nodded slowly, as if this explanation made sense to her. "Like when I got scared of the dark after Mama died, and I forgot how to be brave until Mrs. Peterson taught me to count my breaths." Exactly like that. Officer Michael said, "Sometimes adults need help remembering how to be good parents, just like children sometimes need help remembering how to be brave." Sophie looked thoughtful. "So maybe Daddy isn't trying to be mean. Maybe he's just lost." The compassion in her voice was remarkable. Even after everything she'd endured, this little girl was trying to find a way to understand and forgive. "You have such a kind heart, Sophie," Sarah said admiringly. "But here's something very important. Even if your daddy is lost and sad, that doesn't mean the rules at your house are okay. You still deserve to feel loved and safe every single day." Sophie's expression grew more serious. "But what if telling you all this gets Daddy in trouble? What if it makes him even more lost and sad?" Officer Rachel knelt down to Sophie's eye level. "Sophie, when we help people who are hurting others, even if they don't mean to hurt them, we're actually helping everyone. We're helping you feel safe, and we're helping your daddy learn better ways to show love." "Like teaching?" Sophie asked hopefully. "Like teaching?" Sarah confirmed. "But the most important thing right now is making sure you're okay. You were so brave to come here and ask for help. That took incredible courage." Sophie sat up a little straighter. "Really? I was brave. The bravest," Officer Michael said with a warm smile. "Do you know what the bravest people in the world do? They ask for help when they need it, even when it's scary." For the first time since her mother died, Sophie felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way for things to get better. But then a terrifying thought crossed her mind. What happens now? Do I have to go home and pretend this conversation never happened? The three adults looked at each other, and Sophie could see something serious pass between them. "Sophie," Sarah said gently, "we need to make sure you're safe. And that could indicate significant changes are on the horizon, like a thundercloud." Sophie's question about going home and acting was lingering. Officer Michael, Officer Rachel, and Sarah were all aware that they had arrived at the most important point of the day. Sarah said softly, "Sophie, I have a really crucial question for you, and I want your full honesty. How does it make you feel to consider returning home tonight?" Sophie thought about the question while her tiny hands twisted in her lap. "Are you afraid?" she muttered. "Terribly, terribly afraid." "What frightens you?" Officer Rachel asked quietly. "I'm afraid that Daddy will find out that I discussed our family's rules with others. And I'm afraid that he'll have more time to consider than ever before if he finds out." Sophie's voice became even more minuscule. "However, I'm also afraid that Daddy will be left alone and will become even more disoriented without me if I don't return home." It broke Officer Michael's heart. This 8-year-old girl was afraid of her father's response and worried about handling his feelings. "Sophie," he replied deliberately, "it's not your job to take care of your daddy's feelings. That's what adults are supposed to do for children, not the other way around." Sophie appeared to be somewhat perplexed by this remark. Sarah looked at the policeman thoughtfully and asked, "But who will make sure he eats dinner? Who will make sure he's not too lonely?" Sophie was compelled to take on the position of emotional caregiver for her father, which was a very burdensome responsibility for any child to bear. Sergeant Bill suddenly came up to their tiny group. He had a solemn expression. "I'm sorry to bother you, Sarah, but Millbrook Elementary just called in search of Sophie." Sophie's father arrived at the school. He's furious because the principal told him she wasn't there today. Sophie turned pale at once and began to get to her feet. "I must leave. I've had to leave immediately. Daddy will be devastated if he believes I skipped school, and it will be time to think." "Hold on, Sophie." Officer Rachel put a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder and spoke in a strong but caring manner. "This is not something you must face alone." Sarah dropped down in front of Sophie and whispered, "But I have to go home someday," with tears welling up again. "And when I do, things will be so much worse because I've been gone so long. What if I told you that there might be another option? What if you were exempt from having to return home tonight?" Sophie's eyes widened in astonishment and excitement. "What do you mean? When kids aren't content or safe at home, we sometimes find them somewhere else to be while we teach their family better ways to care for them." Sarah gave a thorough explanation. "Are you referring to the time my friend Emma's cousin spent some time with her grandmother?" Sophie inquired. "That kind of thing?" Sarah gave a nod. Some families welcome children in need of a safe place to remain in their homes. For a long time, Sophie remained silent as she considered this idea. "However, what about Daddy? Should I be absent? Won't he be afraid?" Opposite Sophie, Officer Michael took his seat. "Your father is an adult, Sophie. If he feels lonely or afraid, he can talk to other adults. You're a kid, though, and kids need to feel loved and safe every day." At this moment, Sophie glanced about the three adults before Officer Rachel said, "The most important thing is making sure you're okay. Everything else can be figured out later." "Will I never see my father again if I agree to stay somewhere else tonight?" "Not necessarily," Sarah said honestly. "It might mean that your daddy gets help learning how to be a better parent, and maybe someday you could have the kind of relationship you had with your mama." Sophie's face lit up with a spark of hope. "You mean maybe he could remember how to give hugs and say I love you?" "Maybe," Sarah said gently. "But that would take time and a lot of work on his part. In the meantime, you deserve to be in a place where you feel safe and loved." Sophie took a deep, shaky breath. For 8 years old, she was showing remarkable courage in facing such a life-changing decision. "If I stay somewhere else," Sophie asked quietly, "will there be people there who will say good night to me, even if I'm not perfect?" "Yes, sweetheart," Rachel said with tears in her eyes. "There will be people who will say good night to you every single night, no matter what." Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was a determination that seemed far too mature for her age. "Okay," she said in a small but firm voice. I think I want to try being somewhere safe tonight." In that moment, Sophie made the bravest decision of her young life. She chose to trust that there was something better waiting for her, even though it meant leaving behind everything she knew. Just 20 minutes after Sophie made her brave decision, the police station doors flew open with such force that everyone inside jumped. Sophie's father, Mr. Chun, stormed in with an expression that made Sophie immediately shrink behind Officer Rachel's chair. "Where is my daughter?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the station. "The school said she never showed up after lunch, and someone told me they saw her walking toward downtown." Sophie's whole body began to tremble. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, her father's anger and disappointment. But now it was happening in front of all the people who had been trying to help her. "Mr. Chun," Sergeant Bill said calmly, standing up from his desk. "Sophie is here and she's safe. Please have a seat and we can discuss the situation." "Discuss what situation?" Mr. Chen's voice grew louder. "My daughter skipped school and worried me sick. This is exactly the kind of behavior that happens when children don't have proper discipline." Sophie whispered to Officer Rachel, "See, I told you you'd be disappointed in me. I should have just gone back to school." But Mr. Chen's reaction was proving everything the officers had suspected. His immediate response was a relief that his daughter was safe. It was anger that she had acted independently. Mr. Chun, Sarah said, stepping forward with a professional calm intact. I'm Sarah Williams, a social worker with the county. Sophie came to us today because she had some important questions about family life. Family life is private, Mr. Chin snapped. Whatever my daughter told you is a confused perspective of a child who doesn't understand adult decisions. Sophie flinched at his words, and Officer Michael noticed how she seemed to make herself smaller with every harsh word her father spoke. Actually, Officer Michael said, moving slightly to shield Sophie from her father's direct line of sight. Sophie asked some very thoughtful questions that showed remarkable maturity. Mr. Chen's expression darkened. Maturity? This is exactly why I've been trying to teach her responsibility and self-control. By making her stand in corners for hours, she fled from school and pestered police officials with immature complaints. By not talking to her for days when she makes typical childhood mistakes, said Officer Rachel gently. The room fell silent, and Sophie held her breath, waiting for her father to respond. Those are discipline techniques that build character, Mr. Chin said defensively. My daughter needs to learn that actions have consequences, and that the world doesn't revolve around her wants and feelings. She's 8 years old, Sarah said firmly. 8-year-olds need love, guidance, and emotional support, not isolation and emotional withdrawal. Sophie watched this exchange with growing amazement as adults stood up for her. People told her father that his rules were wrong, and for the first time in 3 years, someone acknowledging that her feelings were important. However, she could also see her father becoming increasingly agitated, and her instincts took over. It's okay, Sophie said in a small voice, stepping out from behind Officer Rachel. Perhaps I should return home and make an effort to follow the rules. The words broke everyone's heart, especially when they saw how Mr. Chen's expression immediately softened at his daughter's submission. That's my good girl, he said, reaching out his hand toward Sophie. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home and forget this whole misunderstanding. But something had changed in Sophie during her hours at the police station. She had tasted what it felt like to be heard, to be believed, and to matter to people. And even though she was scared, she found a courage she didn't know she possessed. Daddy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to forget. I want to keep in mind that there are people who believe I should experience daily affection. Mr. Chen's expression changed from one feeling to another. Feelings of surprise, wrath, and sometimes dread. Sophie, Elizabeth Chun, you will come with me right now, he said in a voice that had always made her obey immediately. But this time, Sophie looked at Officer Rachel, then at Sarah, and then back at her father. I think, she said with a trembling but determined voice, I think I want to stay somewhere safe tonight. The confrontation at the police station had ended with Mr. Chin storming out, threatening legal action and demanding his daughter back. But Sarah had quickly obtained a temporary emergency protective order that would keep Sophie safe for at least 72 hours. Now, 3 hours later, Sophie sat in the living room of the Martinez family home, a specially certified foster family that took in children during emergencies. Mrs. Elena Martinez, a gentle woman in her 50s, was showing Sophie to a small but cozy bedroom. This will be your room for tonight, Mrs. Martinez said softly. There are clean pajamas in the drawer, and if you need anything at all, my room is right next door. Sophie stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the kindness, but also terrified by the unfamiliarity of it all. Mrs. Martinez, what if I have a bad dream? At home, I'm not allowed to wake Daddy up for things like that. Mrs. Martinez knelt down to Sophie's level. Honey, if you have a bad dream, you can absolutely come get me. That's what I'm here for. Sophie's eyes filled with wonder. Really? Even in the middle of the night? Especially in the middle of the night, Mrs. Martinez said with a warm smile. For the first time in years, Sophie didn't have to worry about standing in a corner the next day, gaining the right to speak, or weighing every word to avoid disappointing someone. Children shouldn't have to face scary things alone. That night, Sophie lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. However, the freedom was nearly as frightening as the limitations. Sophie woke up from a dream about her mother at around 2 a.m. Her mother had been proud of her in the dream for having the courage to ask for assistance. However, The typical remorse began to creep in when she woke up. Could it be that her father was correct? What if she simply couldn't take regular discipline because she was a pampered child? What if she'd ruined her family for no reason? Sophie, unable to sleep, rose silently and went to window. The lights of her former neighborhood were visible in the distance, and she pondered whether her father was also up and considering her. At that moment, a soft knock on her door was heard. Mrs. Martinez said, "Sophie," in a gentle and kind tone. "Your light was on, as I could see." With tears in her eyes, Sophie opened the door and asked, "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Mrs. Martinez sat on the edge of Sophie's bed and patted the area beside her, asking, "Mrs. Martinez, what if I made a huge mistake? What if Daddy is all alone and scared because I left? Honey, come on over here. Let's discuss this." Sophie ascended and took a seat next to this generous stranger, who made her feel safer than she had ever felt at home. "Did you feel content most of the time when you lived with your father, Sophie?" Sophie considered her response carefully. "No, most of the time I felt anxious, concerned about doing everything incorrectly, about disappointing him, and about breaching the rules. And despite being in a new place, how do you feel at the moment?" Sophie found this to be both frightening and calming, like if she could breathe more deeply or something. Knowingly, Mrs. Martinez nodded. "Sophie, safety is that sensation of being able to breathe more deeply, and all children should have that feeling. However, what if I had to look after Daddy? What if my departure was an act of selfishness?" Mrs. Martinez took her hands in Sophie's little hands. "You're 8 years old, my love. Taking care of your father's feelings is not your responsibility. He's supposed to look after yours." This was the first time Sophie had ever heard anything like it. It was revolutionary to realize that she was not in charge of controlling her father's emotions. Mrs. Martinez felt tears well up in her eyes, but she spoke steadily and warmly as she inquired, "Do you think there's something wrong with me? Because sometimes I want hugs, and I love you so badly that it hurt inside my chest." "There's nothing at all wrong with you. Honey, the most common thing in the world is the need for love and affection. It indicates that your heart is functioning as it should." Sophie felt for the first time in 3 years that perhaps her deepest impulses weren't flaws to be embarrassed of. "Even though I'm not your biological daughter, will you still wish me a good night, Mrs. Martinez?" Mrs. Martinez stroked Sophie's hair tenderly and said, "Sophie, I'd be honored to wish you a good night. Sweet dreams, lovely young lady. You're secure. You will be all right, and you are loved." 3 days later, Sophie was terrified as she sat in a sterile courtroom that had an old wood odor. The court was inclined to send Sophie home in spite of all that had transpired, all the evidence Sarah had acquired, and the statements made by the officers and Mrs. Peterson. Judge Harrison said, "Mr. Chun," as he went over his documents, "while the court acknowledges that your parenting methods are quite strict, there's no evidence of physical harm to the child. Emotional discipline, while perhaps harsh, is not illegal." Sophie felt her heart sink, all her courage, all her hope, and it was going to end with her being sent back to the silent house where love was rationed and childhood was considered a weakness. Sarah stood up from her table. "Your Honor, with respect, systematic emotional deprivation can be just as harmful as physical abuse. For 3 years, this child has been denied fundamental emotional needs." The judge retorted, "Ms. Williams, courts must deal with facts, not feelings." In actuality, Mr. Chin gives his daughter food, shelter, and education. Such steadiness would be appreciated by many kids. Although Sophie had been informed that children didn't speak in court until specifically requested, she still wanted to speak up and explain that ability without love was like living in a lovely jail. Meanwhile, Mr. Chin appeared vindicated as he sat at his table. Wearing his finest suit, he spoke persuasively about his resolve to bring up a disciplined, responsible daughter who would not be spoiled by the lax attitudes of society. He had testified before Your Honor, "Although my techniques may appear archaic, they are intended to equip my daughter for a world that will not indulge her feelings. I think I'm acting in her best interests." As they watched the legal system get ready to fail a child they had come to care about very much, officers Michael and Rachel sat in the gallery, feeling powerless. Judge Harrison was on the verge of making his ruling when an elderly woman entered the courtroom through the open doors. Despite being well-dressed, she walked slowly and supported herself with a cane. The woman answered, "Your Honor," with a firm, clear voice. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but this situation depends on information I have." Judge Harrison had a grumpy expression. "This is really erratic, ma'am. Who are you?" "For the past 3 years, I, Eleanor Patterson, have been Sophie Chen's neighbor. I was concerned I was going too far, but I should have spoken out sooner. I became aware that my silence could have exacerbated the situation for this young child after learning about this instance." Sarah got to her feet. "I would like to ask Your Honor whether Mrs. Patterson may testify. If new witness testimony is pertinent to the welfare of the child, it is admissible." The judge nodded while he moaned. "You're welcome to take the stand, Mrs. Patterson." Sophie sensed a glimmer of optimism as the old woman walked to the witness stand. The few times she'd met Mrs. Patterson in the yard, she'd always been treated with kindness. Sarah started, "What have you noticed in the Chen household during the last 3 years, Mrs. Patterson?" Mrs. Patterson spoke steadily but regretfully. "For the past 3 years, I've heard that young girl sobbing herself to sleep nearly every night. I've spent hours upon hours watching her stand still in front of the living room window. I now see that she was probably too scared to request clean clothes, which is why I've been seeing her in the same outfits for weeks on end." There was utter silence in the courtroom. "Most tragically," Mrs. Patterson went on, "Mrs. Patterson, why didn't you report these observations earlier?" The old woman's voice cracked slightly. "Because I was raised in a similar manner 60 years ago. I've watched a bright, curious child become quieter and sadder with each passing month. Last week, I saw her try and pet a stray cat in the yard, and when her father called her inside, she immediately stopped and stood with her hands behind her back like she was afraid of being caught enjoying something." Judge Harrison's expression was starting to change. "I convinced myself that Sophie would also survive if I did. However, after seeing her over the past 5 years, I've come to the conclusion that simply living is insufficient. Children should not only survive, but flourish." Tears filled her eyes as she gazed straight at Sophie. "I'm sorry, my love, for being quiet for so long. I ought to have shown more courage for you." The judge remained silent for a while, going over his notes and carefully considering what he had heard. "Mrs. Patterson," at last he asked, "in your opinion, is Sophie Chen in emotional danger if she returns to her father's care?" Without pause, Mrs. Patterson replied, "Yes, Your Honor. That child is dying inside little by little every day. And if we send her back without any changes, I'm afraid we'll lose the bright, loving little girl she's supposed to be forever." For the first time since the hearing began, Sophie felt like someone truly understood what she had been trying to explain. After Mrs. Patterson's powerful testimony, the courtroom remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Judge Harrison removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly, and looked directly at Sophie for the first time during the entire hearing. "Sophie," he said gently, "I'd like to ask you a question. What do you expect will happen today, please?" Sophie's heart began to race. She looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly, then back at the judge. "Your Honor," Sophie said in a voice so quiet that everyone had to lean forward to hear her, "I just hope that someday I can have a family where it's okay to feel happy, where it's okay to ask questions without being afraid, and where someone will tell me they love me, not because I earned it, but just because." The simple honesty of her words hit everyone in the courtroom like a wave. Judge Harrison was quiet for another long moment. Then he made a decision that surprised everyone. "I'm going to order a 30-day temporary placement for Sophie while Mr. Chen undergoes family counseling. If he completes the program successfully and demonstrates significant changes in his parenting approach, we'll reassess the situation." Mr. Chen stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. I don't need counseling to raise my own daughter." "Mr. Chen," the judge said firmly, "your daughter came to a police station in tears, asking if all fathers treat their children the way you do. That alone tells me that something needs to change. You have 30 days to show this court that you can learn to meet your daughter's emotional needs." Sophie felt a mixture of relief and worry. 30 days felt like a lifetime. But what if her father refused to get help? What if he just got angrier? After the hearing, As they walked out of the courtroom, Mrs. Patterson approached Sophie with a gentle smile. "I'm proud of you for being so brave, dear," she said. "I wish I'd been as brave as you when I was your age." "Mrs. Patterson," Sophie asked, "what happened to you when you were little?" The elderly woman knelt down carefully. "I learned to be very quiet and very small, and I never asked for help. I thought that was just how life was supposed to be. But watching you fight for something better, it reminded me that children deserve to be children." Sophie hugged Mrs. Patterson tightly. "Thank you for speaking up for me, even if it was scary." "Sometimes the most important things we do are the scariest," Mrs. Patterson replied. "But you taught me that it's never too late to be brave." That evening, back at the Martinez house, Sophie sat at the dinner table with Elena and her husband, Carlos. They were having spaghetti and meatballs, and Sophie had been amazed when Elena asked her if she was hungry instead of just putting food in front of her. "Sophie," Carlos said, "Elena tells me you're quite the artist. Would you like to show me some of your drawings after dinner?" Sophie looked surprised. "You want to see my drawings, even though they're not very good?" "Art isn't about being good or bad," Elena said with a warm smile. "It's about expressing what's in your heart. And I bet your heart has beautiful things to show us." After dinner, Sophie shyly brought out a small notebook where she had been sketching. The drawings were simple but filled with emotion. Pictures of families holding hands, children playing in sunny yards, and one drawing that made Elena's breath catch. It was a picture of a little girl standing alone in a corner, but above her head was a thought bubble filled with rainbows, butterflies, and smiling faces. "Sophie," Elena said softly, "can you tell me about this drawing?" "That's me." During reflection time, Sophie explained matter-of-factly. "I learned that even when my body has to be still and quiet, my mind can go to happy places. I would imagine what it would feel like to run through fields of flowers or have a tea party with my mama." Carlos wiped his eyes and looked away for a moment. The resilience of this little girl was both inspiring and heartbreaking. "You know what I think?" Elenina said, sitting down next to Sophie. "I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Not because you learned to stand still and be quiet, but because you never stopped dreaming of something better." Sophie looked up at Elena with wonder. "Really? You think I'm strong?" "I think you're incredibly strong," Carlos added. "And I think you're going to help a lot of people someday because of everything you've learned." That night, as Elena tucked Sophie into bed, Sophie asked a question she'd been afraid to voice. "Elena, what if my daddy doesn't want to learn how to be different? What if 30 days isn't long enough?" Elena sat on the edge of the bed and took Sophie's hand. "Then we'll figure out what comes next together. But right now, you don't have to worry about taking care of anyone else's feelings. Your only job is to be 8 years old and let the adults handle the grown-up problems." Sophie felt a weight lifting off her shoulders that she didn't even realize she'd been carrying. "Elena," Sophie said as she was drifting off to sleep, "thank you for making me feel like I matter." "Sophie," Elena whispered, "you matter more than you could ever know." 2 weeks into the 30-day placement, Sarah arranged for Sophie to have her first supervised visit with her father. Sophie had been both dreading and hoping for this moment. When Mr. Chin walked into the family services office, Sophie was shocked by how different he looked. He seemed smaller somehow with dark circles under his eyes. "Hello, Sophie," he said quietly, sitting down across from her. His voice wasn't stern or commanding. It was just sad. "Hi, Daddy," Sophie whispered. After several minutes of uncomfortable silence, Mr. Chin finally spoke. "Sophie, I've been going to counsel like the judge ordered, and I've learned some things that have been very difficult for me to hear." Sophie looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "The counselor helped me understand that after your mother died, I was so afraid of losing you, too, that I tried to protect you by making you strong. But I realize now that what I thought was making you strong was actually hurting you." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. This was the first time her father had ever admitted his methods might have been wrong. "I was taught that showing too much affection makes children weak," Mr. Chin continued, his voice breaking. "My own father never hugged me or told me he loved me, and I thought that was just how fathers were supposed to be." "But you used to hug me," Sophie said quietly before Mama went to heaven. Mr. Chen's face crumpled. "I did, and I stopped because I was scared. I was scared that if I loved you too much, losing you would destroy me the way losing your mother almost did. Sophie felt confused. So, you decided to stop loving me, so it wouldn't hurt if something happened to me. I never stopped loving you, Mr. Chen said through tears. But I stopped showing it, which I now understand is almost the same thing. He looked directly at Sophie. Sophie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I made you feel like you had to earn love. I'm sorry that I made you responsible for my feelings. And I'm sorry that I taught you to be afraid of being a normal, loving child. Sophie had dreamed of hearing these words, but now she felt overwhelmed. Daddy, how do I know that if I come home, you won't get scared again and go back to the old rules? I don't know if I can promise I'll never make mistakes again, he said honestly. But I can promise that I'm learning better ways to handle my fears, and I want to be the father you deserve. When you think about me now, what do you want from me? Sophie asked. I want you to feel safe. I want you to laugh and play without being afraid. I want you to know that you're loved every day, no matter what. And I want you to grow up knowing that your feelings matter. Sophie had always wanted to hear those words, but she had learned to be cautious about hope. Those are beautiful words, Daddy. But I need to see that you really mean them before I can trust them. Mr. Chen nodded. I understand, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I can be the father you need me to be. As the visit ended, Sophie felt cautious hope that maybe her family could be healed. But she knew words were just the beginning. As the 30-day deadline approached, the final court hearing was scheduled. Mr. Chen had completed his counseling program and was requesting that Sophie be returned to his care. The night before the hearing, Sophie couldn't sleep. Elena found her awake at 2 a.m. What's on your mind, sweetheart? I'm afraid, Sophie said when Elena gently inquired. But what if I return home and my father makes a concerted effort for a few days before reverting to his old methods when no one is looking? That's a very smart thing to worry about, Elena said. What would make you feel safer? Sophie thought carefully. I think I need to know that if things get bad again, I can call for help and people will believe me. Sophie, you will always have our phone number. You will always have people who believe you and want to help you. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Mrs. Peterson, Officer Michael, Officer Rachel, and Mrs. Patterson were all there to show support. Judge Harrison called Mr. Chen to testify first. Mr. Chen, can you tell the court what you've learned during counseling? Mr. Chen stood up, his voice humble. Your Honor, I learned that I was repeating a cycle of emotional distance from my own father. I learned that my fear of loss was causing me to push away the person I love most. How do you plan to parent differently? Mr. Chen pulled out a piece of paper. I've written new family rules with my counselor's help. Rule 1. Sophie can express her feelings without judgment. Rule 2. Affection and kind words are gifts to be given freely every day. Rule 3. Sophie can ask questions and make mistakes without fear. Rule 4. If Sophie ever feels unsafe, she has permission to tell a trusted adult, and I will work with them instead of getting angry. The courtroom was silent. What makes you believe you can follow these rules when stress returns? Because I've learned that my daughter's emotional well-being is more important than my comfort zone. And because I've seen what happens when I don't follow them, I almost lost the most precious thing in my life. Then it was Sophie's turn. Sophie, how do you feel about possibly going home? Sophie stood up, her small voice carrying surprising strength. Your Honor, I love my daddy very much and I want to believe he can change. But I also learned something important these past few weeks. She gathered her courage. I learned that I deserve to feel loved and safe every day. I learned it's okay to have feelings and ask for help. And I learned I'm not responsible for taking care of grown-ups' emotions. She looked at her father. Daddy, if I come home, I need you to know I'm not the same little girl who was afraid to speak up. If the old rules come back, I will ask for help again because I know now that I matter. Judge Harrison was quiet before speaking. I'm going to allow Sophie to return to your care, but with conditions. You'll continue counseling for 6 months. Sophie will have regular check-ins, and Sophie will keep phone numbers of people she trusts. Sophie felt relief, hope, and determination. She was going home as a different person, one who knew her worth. As they left together, Mr. Chen knelt to Sophie's level. I'm proud of you for being brave enough to ask for help. You saved our family. I love you, Daddy. And I'm willing to try again if you are. I love you too, Sophie. We're going to figure out how to be a real family again. 3 months after returning home, Sophie faced her first real test. She accidentally knocked over a glass of milk during breakfast, and for a split second, the old fear crashed over her. Her body tensed, waiting for disappointment. Silent treatment. Corner time. But her father surprised her. Oops, he said, reaching for paper towels. No worries, sweetheart. Accidents happen. Sophie stood frozen, hardly believing what she heard. Daddy, aren't you disappointed in me? Mr. Chen stopped and looked at his daughter with heartbreak in his eyes. The fact that she still expected punishment reminded him of the damage he had done. Sophie, I'm not disappointed at all. You didn't break it on purpose, did you? Sophie shook her head. Then there's nothing to be disappointed about. Let's clean this up together. As they wiped up the milk together, Sophie felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Relief at making a mistake, without consequences. Daddy, can I ask you something? Of course. You can ask me anything anytime. Sophie took a breath. Sometimes I still get scared that you'll go back to the old ways. Is that okay to tell you? Mr. Chen's counseling had taught him to listen instead of react defensively. It's absolutely okay to tell me that. In fact, I'm glad you did. It means you trust me enough to share your fears. He sat down and patted the chair next to him. Sometimes I get scared too. I get scared that I'll make the same mistakes. But you know what helps me? What? Remembering that you're brave enough to tell me if I do. And remembering that getting help made our family better, not worse. Sophie considered this. So if I tell you when I'm scared, it actually helps you, too. It helps me a lot because it means we're taking care of each other the right way. That afternoon, something significant happened. Sophie came home upset about a friend at school. In the old days, she would have hidden her feelings. Instead, she said, Daddy, I had a really hard day. Can we discuss it? Mr. Chun immediately stopped what he was doing. Of course. Tell me what happened. Sophie explained that her friend Emma had said hurtful things at lunch. I felt really sad and want to cry, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed to. Mr. Chen's heart broke a little more. Sophie, you're always allowed to cry when you're sad. Tears are how our hearts heal. Really, even if it seems like a small thing. Even then, your feelings are important, no matter what caused them. As Sophie began to cry, Mr. Chen did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He pulled his daughter into a warm, comforting hug and let her cry as long as she needed. I love you, Sophie, he whispered, and I'm proud of you for telling me when you're hurting. Sophie melted into her father's embrace. I love you, too, Daddy, and I'm proud of you for learning how to hug me again. That evening, as he tucked her into bed, Sophie asked a question that proved their healing. Daddy, do you think other kids who feel scared at home should ask for help too? I think any child who doesn't feel safe or loved should absolutely ask for help. And the adults should be grateful they're brave enough to speak up, even if it's scary for the grown-ups, especially then, because sometimes grown-ups need help learning how to love better, just like I did. Sophie smiled. Good, because I want to help other kids know they deserve to feel loved every day. Sweet dreams, my brave, wonderful daughter. I love you. I love you too, Daddy. Thank you for learning how to be my safe place again. 6 months after that tearful day in the police station, Sophie walked through the same doors that had changed her life forever. But this time, she wasn't crying. This time, she was smiling and carrying a wrapped package. Officer Rachel looked up, and her face lit up. Sophie, look at you. Sophie glowed with happiness and confidence. She stood taller, her eyes sparkled, and most importantly, she looked like a child who knew she was loved. Hi, Officer Rachel. I brought you and Officer Michael something. Officer Michael emerged from the back office, grinning. There's our brave girl. How are you doing? I'm doing really, really good. Sophie beamed. Daddy and I are learning how to be a real family, and it's better than I ever imagined. Sarah walked in with perfect timing. Sophie, you look absolutely radiant, sweetheart. Sophie hugged each of them tightly. These 3 adults who had listened when she needed the most. I wanted to give you something, Sophie said, unwrapping her package. Inside was a drawing, but this one was different from her sad pictures before. The drawing showed a little girl in front of a police station surrounded by caring adults. Above it in Sophie's careful writing, "Thank you for teaching me that every child deserves to feel loved every day. Sophie, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me," Officer Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. "There's something on the back, too," Sophie said shyly. They turned it over. For other kids who might need to know, it's okay to ask for help. Some adults will listen to you and take you seriously. Sophie, you deserve to feel cherished and safe. Michael, the officer, wiped his tears. "This is amazing. Sophie, you've given other kids hope by using your experience. When I grow up, I want to do that. Like I used to, I wish to help children who are afraid. I want children to know that others will support them and that their feelings are important." "What do you know?" Sarah remarked. "I think that just by having the courage to speak up, you're already helping other kids." At that moment, Mr. Chin emerged from the doorway. For a minute, the policemen strained as they recalled their initial meeting. However, this man was not at all like the irate father they had encountered 6 months prior. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I came to express my gratitude." He gazed at them all with sincere appreciation. "In addition to saving my daughter's life, you also saved mine. I nearly ruined the most valuable item in my existence because I was so consumed by my anxieties." "What's going on at home?" Officer Rachel inquired. "Better than I could have ever imagined. Sophie and I are learning how to communicate, express our emotions, and act like a true family. It's the most significant thing I've ever done, but it's also the hardest." He placed a tender touch on Sophie's shoulder. "Additionally, Sophie has been the most understanding and forgiving instructor I could ask for." Sophie gazed lovingly up at her father. "Daddy can now provide a great embrace. And he genuinely means it when he tells me he loves me every day." Sophie glanced back to her 3 heroes as they got ready to depart. "Sarah, Officer Rachel, and Officer Michael, I appreciate you taking the time to hear my query that day. I appreciate that you thought I was important. And I appreciate you teaching me that I was worthy of greater." She had a radiant smile. "Additionally, I now know the answer to my query. My father used to do something that not many fathers do. Like my father now, most fathers adore their children every day." Sophie glanced up at her father outside. Mr. Chin knelt down to look into her eyes and asked, "Daddy, do you think my story could help other kids?" "Sophie, I think your story will help more people than you can imagine. You turned your pain into purpose, and that's one of the most powerful things a person can do." Sophie was pleased. "Good. Since every child should understand that they are important and that adults are always willing to help if they ask." Both of them realized as they drove home that they had gone from broken to healed, from silence to conversation, and from fear to love. The response to Sophie's query had been exquisite. Not all fathers act in that way. Every youngster deserves to be loved unconditionally every day. Sophie now possessed it, and she would dedicate her life to ensuring that other kids understood that they were entitled to the same.